Dear fellow citizens and voters of the Menzies constituency. My name is Sanjeev Sabhlok, and I'm a resident of Bulleen. I'm contesting the 21 May 2022 parliamentary election from my local seat of Menzies, named after Robert Menzies, the founder of Australia's Liberal Party. I'm a great admirer of Menzies, and I'm committed to following in his footsteps to promote liberty and integrity in Australia. I have a PhD in economics from the USA, the University of Southern California in Los Angeles. I came to Australia from India in December 2000, where I had been a senior civil servant. Since then, I've lived in this constituency, Menzies constituency, now for nearly 22 years. Of these 22 years, for over 20 years, I worked in Victorian government agencies, initially in the Victorian Workcover Authority as a mid-level executive, and later for 15 years in the Department of Treasury and Finance as a senior economist. I'm making this video to introduce myself to you and to share information about the lies and deceptions you've been told by the major parties, which has cost our nation dearly, including many lives of the young and a debt that is now as big as $1 trillion. That is why I was forced to resign my job and now to enter politics, and I'll come to that. If you remember, in March 2020, Australia turned on a dime from being a role model in human rights and liberty and good governance into becoming a totalitarian society with society-wide lockdowns, border closures, including the Ring of Steel, the famous Ring of Steel around Melbourne, which you're all familiar with, and mandatory masks in open parks. A full-blown police state was unleashed. A regime of papers, please, was introduced. Only this time, the papers were electronic, QR codes and vaccine certificates. Why did we impose these policies, which were never imposed before in human history? There was nothing of the sort in human history. In fact, I've studied the literature quite extensively, and there's never been a single instance of a lockdown of this nature, which was so large and on a large scale, or which was actually effective or useful. So there's no recommendation for a lockdown anywhere in the entire literature in human history. So why was any of this justified? What we've gone through for the past 2 years, was any of this justified? And was there a better way to do this? So I want to sort of quickly dwell upon Western civilizations or the Enlightenment's two pillars. The pillars of Western civilization, the first is that the government must not interfere in the life of citizens without a strong justification. And the second is that public policy must be based on evidence, not the arbitrary whim or imagination of the government. It cannot be based on models, which are speculative and is like garbage in and garbage out. You can't be basing public policy on models. It must be based on strong evidence. This is the basic requirement of a Western civilization nation. And that's how you defend liberty, but also have good economic growth and jobs. Accordingly, Australia had a stringent regime of risk-based regulation. I mean, I worked in Victorian Workcover Authority. The occupational health and safety laws are entirely risk-based and are excellent, I would argue. And then we have a requirement for a cost-benefit analysis embedded in virtually all legislation. Both these issues, risk-based regulation or regulation policy and the cost-benefit analysis requirement, are matters on which I advised the Victorian governments as a senior economist for 15 years. But unfortunately, both these principles were thrown out of the window in 2020. The evidence about the distribution of risks from COVID was available since mid-February 2020. And by mid-March 2020, we had a much clearer picture about the magnitude, and we knew that this was a relatively modest pandemic. In fact, the Victorian pandemic plan of the 10th of March 2020 said that COVID was of moderate severity, moderate clinical severity, which is what it is. It is somewhere in the range of the Asian flu or the Hong Kong flu. Moreover, the government was required by its pandemic plans and laws to act in a proportionate manner and targeted manner. Only those policies which will have a direct effect and not harm anybody else. So there were many risk-based actions that the government could have undertaken, but it chose to copy Communist Party of China's Wuhan lockdowns. None of these policies, none of the policies implemented in Australia are found in the October 2019 World Health Organization pandemic guidelines or in any of Australia's pandemic plans. We just binned these documents. We did completely, we copied China. In fact, that is why, I call this the Great Hysteria, and I'll come to that in a second. Anyway, so after a series of incidents, I resigned my job in the Victorian Treasury in September 2020. I then tried to get Australia's politicians to change their policies through television appearances on Sky News, Channel 9, Channel 7, Sunrise or whatever, articles, and I wrote a book and a complaint to the International Criminal Court. And this is my book, The Great Hysteria and the Broken State, and you can have a read of that if you wish. It's available for purchase, but no one wanted to listen. And so given the colossal failure of the Liberal and Labour parties to even admit that their policies have harmed Australia, I was forced to start a new political party called Australia's Representatives. That party later merged with the Australian Federation Party. It is a party that is now committed to liberty and good policy, committed to listening to the people. It's completely different. It's a unique party built on liberty, but also listening to the people. I believe, unfortunately, that if Menzies were alive today, he would have rejected his own Liberal Party, which has gone astray. The apparatchiks of the Liberal Party, the communist parties have these apparatchiks. And so the apparatchiks of the Liberal Party have supported Scott Morrison's deceit, his blatantly false comparison of COVID with the Spanish flu to justify his Communist Party style policies, and his claim that he has saved 30,000 lives. The fact is, I've disproved this so many times in so many places, but recently, the world's most cited epidemiologist, John Ioannidis of the Stanford University, confirmed to me by email that COVID is 50 to 500 times less lethal than the Spanish flu. There you are, 50 to 500 times less lethal than the Spanish flu. And I'm currently assisting Professor Gigi Foster of the University of New South Wales to prepare a draft cost-benefit analysis that details the enormous harms caused by the Labour and Liberal Party policies. Morrison did not save 30,000 lives. That's a huge lie. But hopefully the cost-benefit analysis will be available before the elections, and I'll provide much more details then. Basically, I believe that Australia is no more the country it was when I came. As a citizen of Indian origin in this country, I take liberty very seriously. I take good policy very seriously. And so I've been forced to take up the task of getting us back to the country we were once proud of. We want an Australia we can be proud of, not an Australia which harms its own citizens, like what's happened in the last 2 years. Please free to ask me questions at sabhlok@gmail.com, and I'll attempt to provide answers. I suggest that you consider looking for me on Facebook. I've got a page for the Menzies candidacy, and I'll provide a link as part of this video when I share it. Thank you so much. I've just recovered from COVID, so you'll pardon my recovery. I've just been recovering. And by the way, I had the vaccines and I still got the COVID, and we know that it's a leaky vaccine, but it may potentially prevent a few extra deaths. But really, at the end of the day, this has not been the kind of overdone, it's not a black plague. It's not the biggest thing since human beings were born. And so the kind of policies that were introduced and implemented, including vaccine mandates, we cannot accept that in Australia. We must change Australia, and the only way to change it is through the political process. And I'm here to help you. Send me to the parliament, and I will get this changed. That's my commitment. Thank you very much.